Hi, guys, and welcome to another 7-minute lecture. Are human beings and animals equal? Should they enjoy the same rights that we do? There's a term used in philosophy for this. It's called speciesism, and it's what today's lecture will revolve around. Speciesism is basically the idea that members of our own species are more important than creatures belonging to other species. The term was first coined by the British psychologist Richard Ryder in 1970, and he used it in the context of animal rights. About 5 years later, the term became famous when the Australian philosopher Peter Singer wrote this famous book called Animal Liberation, which would go on to become one of the most influential books in the animal rights movement. So, even though these two are the ones who created and popularized the word, they were both anti speciesism. They argued that it was a prejudice, kind of like racism and sexism. They argued that a bird's life is just as valuable as yours, that you can't just think of yourself as special simply because you're a member of the human species, and that atrocities committed against, let's say, birds are morally just as bad as atrocities committed against human beings. So, this is one of the foundations of the modern animal rights movement. If you look at something like PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, which is probably the most well known animal rights organization in the world, they have about 6 or 7 million supporters, is what they claim. If you look at some of their major campaigns, this reflects on sort of just how deeply speciesism is rejected in these campaigns. They had a famous campaign about 20 years ago, for example, comparing the meat industry to the Holocaust. And while many criticize that campaign, it is what they have to believe because they reject speciesism. If you truly believe that human beings and animals are the same, then you've got to believe that the modern meat industry is organized murder on a scale that makes even the Holocaust look tiny. Because let's face it, about 200 million animals are slaughtered around the world every day for food. And a big chunk of that would come from the meat industry, where the animals who are about to be slaughtered are kept congested and badly treated in their own version of what can only be described as a concentration camp. If you believe that animals and humans are equal, you should also be against people having pets, since that would be a form of slavery where an animal belongs to you as if it was your property, as if you owned it. When you say my pet, it signifies ownership. So, people who reject speciesism, like once again PETA, have compared zoos to organized slaveries as well. Some people say, look, all of this is ridiculous. While we can try to limit animal cruelty, comparing this to slavery or the Holocaust is morally reprehensible. It demeans the experiences of human beings who really were the victims of slavery and genocide. So, most regular people around the world eat meat or seafood as a part of their diet. So, they clearly subscribe to speciesism. Most people in the world clearly believe that animal rights are not as important as human rights, and animal lives not as important as human lives. The important question here is this: do we need to see animals and humans as equal in order for us to make progress on animal rights? Or can we consider human beings to be more important and still be ethical? My assertion is that we can still make progress even by sort of looking at human beings as superior. Because when we look at the modern landscape of animal rights, most regular people are quite firm when it comes to eliminating animal cruelty, needless animal cruelty. This could be killing animals for luxury coats and clothes, using animals for experiments, destroying animal habitat, mistreating domestic pets. On all these fronts, a lot of moral progress has been made in the last few decades. Less than 50 years ago, it was completely normal for monkeys and dogs to be experimented on, even by regular companies with a lab. That's simply not the case today, where animal testing is very heavily regulated, and there are certain types of animals that you simply cannot use for certain types of experiments. When you look at something like the fur trade and the ivory trade, even though they still exist as industries today, they're certainly not what they once were, because the general population has become aware of the morality in it, and they've said we will not support these industries. You could argue that something like the ivory trade was destroyed because of depleting elephant populations, but we certainly need to acknowledge that awareness is a lot higher now as well. And even in industries where animal exploitation still does happen, we've made a lot of progress. In the meat industry, there are rules and regulations in order to avoid needless cruelty that didn't exist a short while ago, right? You could you could look at zoos and the circus and performances where animals are used, and a lot of those conditions have improved throughout the world as well. Some of them have been outright banned. The use of animals when we film, there are very clear disclaimers that content producers have to put up these days to assure the audience that animals were not harmed in the production. That's a recent development. You can now legally punish someone for abusing their pet. Once again, recent legal development. Many sports in which animals were harmed, all of that is just practice in pockets now. And even where they are, there's a lot of debate and awareness over whether this is ethical or not. Take something like bullfighting in Spain, for example. Even though it's tremendously popular, there is now a huge debate with the current younger generation about the ethics of it. So all of these things represent great progress we've made as a species in terms of treating other species better. So you don't have to be someone who subscribes to that idea that humans and the rest are the same for us to be able to make moral progress. Speciesism might be hypocritical, it might even be unscientific, but it's simply a way of life, and it's likely to always be the way of life, where a human life will always be considered more important and inherently having more value than a cow's or a crow's life. Tell me where you stand in the comments below. Do you see speciesism as a form of prejudice that needs to be eradicated, or do you believe that there is a moral importance that comes from being a human, which simply doesn't come with other animals? I'd love to know what you think. If you like content like this, please don't forget to share and subscribe. Thank you, take care, and I'll see you soon.